There is a kind of silence people mistake for peace. It is the silence of a woman who has learned that her wants change nothing. So she stops speaking them, and everyone around her calls her content, because content is easier to live beside than grief. For 9 years, the Duke of Caverly had such a wife. She never raised her voice, never asked for more, never once complained. And then, on a gray morning at the end of winter, the servants climbed to her room and found her trunk already packed. The Duchess of Caverly was called Aveline, though almost no one used the name. To the servants, she was Madam. To the tenants, she was Her Grace. To her husband, she was a courtesy murmured across the length of a dinner table. "Good evening, madam," and nothing warmer in 9 years of marriage. She had grown used to it the way a body grows used to cold water, by refusing to flinch. What no one used, and what everyone relied upon, was the work of her. Caverly Court ran like a well-kept clock, and Aveline was the hand that wound it in the dark before anyone woke. She kept the account books the steward believed he kept. She knew to the shilling what the household spent, and what the land brought in, which roofs leaked, and which tenants were behind, and why. She had quietly turned 3 failing farms back to profit, and let her husband go on, thinking the steward had done it. She had done it because the doing was the one thing at Caverly that had ever needed her, and a person will pour herself into the only vessel that does not leak. And there was the boy. Gideon was 9 years old, the son of the Duke's dead younger brother, Everard, and he had been placed in Aveline's arms as an infant, the same season she was placed in this house. 2 unwanted parcels delivered to a man who had asked for neither. Ivor had given the child a name and a nursery, and a distance he never crossed. Aveline had given him everything else. She had walked the floors with his fevers, taught him his letters, learned the whole small geography of his griefs. If she loved anything in the world, without permission, it was Gideon, and that love was the softest and most dangerous thing she owned. She would not have left. In 9 years, the thought had never once finished itself. What changed was a conversation, 3 days before, in the Little East parlor, where her companion, Miss Cathcart, sat with her needlework and her gentle, sorrowing voice. Miss Cathcart had heard a thing, she said, and could not in conscience keep it from a friend. The Duke had written to London. There was to be an ending of the marriage, quietly, the way great men ended things that had ceased to serve them. He meant to take a true wife at last, one who might give him a son of his own blood. And the boy, poor lamb, was to be sent north to a school for the winters and the summers both, so that the new Duchess should not be troubled by another woman's child. Aveline had said nothing. She had thanked Miss Cathcart for her kindness and gone on with her list of the week's provisions, and her face had not moved, because a face that has not moved in 9 years forgets how. But something behind it had gone very still and very clear, the way a pond goes clear when at last it stops being stirred. She did not confront him. She had learned in the first year that her wants changed nothing, and she was not a woman who begged twice for anything. If she was to be set aside, she would not be set aside like a piece of furniture carried out while its owner looked away. She would walk out on her own feet, upright, before they could do it to her. So that night, when the house was asleep, she packed. She took only what she had carried into the marriage, which was very little, the plain gray things from before she was anyone's grace. She did not touch the silks the dressmaker sent each season, nor the jewels locked in the blue case, because in 9 years she had never once thought of them as hers. She folded her few possessions into the old trunk with the worn leather straps and set it by the window. Then she sat beside it in the dark, dry-eyed, and looked at the nursery door across the passage and did not let herself go in. Once in the night, She crossed the passage as far as that door, laid her hand flat against the wood, and listened to the small, even breathing beyond it. Then she took her hand away. Whatever this morning cost, she meant to be the one who paid it. She was still there when the gray light came, and still there when the housemaid Loveday pushed the door open with the morning coals and stopped dead upon the threshold, the scuttle slipping in her hands, staring at the packed trunk as though it were a coffin. Mrs. Sowerby had kept the keys of Caverley Court for 30 years, and in that time she had learned that the loudest events in a great house arrive without a sound. So when Loveday came down the back stairs 2 at a time, with her face the color of dripping, the housekeeper set down the linen she was counting, and knew, before a word was out of the girl, that something had come loose at the top of the house. She climbed the stairs at her own pace, because a housekeeper who runs teaches the whole household to be afraid. She found the Duchess sitting composed by the window in her traveling cloak, hands folded, as still as she was every morning, and the old trunk strapped shut at her feet. For a long moment the 2 women looked at one another, and neither spoke, and the silence had in it 9 years of things unsaid. "Madam," Mrs. Sowerby said at last, carefully, "the morning is raw. Shall I have the fire built up?" "There is no need," Aveline answered. Her voice was quiet and perfectly even. "I shall not be keeping the room." The housekeeper's eyes went to the trunk. She had dressed and stripped the great chambers of this house for 3 decades, had packed trunks for dead men and departing brides, and she knew the weight of a life by the size of what it carried away. This trunk was small. She let her gaze rest on it, and felt something turn over in her chest, for she understood at once that the woman who had run every corner of Caverley for 9 years was leaving it owning almost nothing, and that no one in the house but herself had ever marked how little the Duchess had asked in the whole of that time. A woman who asked for nothing, the housekeeper had found, was a woman. It grew easy to give nothing, and the whole house had learned the habit of her without once thinking to thank her for it. She might have told herself it was not her affair. Another servant would have. But Mrs. Sowerby had watched this quiet woman sit up 3 nights together with the young master through the croup while his uncle slept undisturbed at the far end of the house. She had seen her set the steward's clumsy figures right, without once letting him lose his face over it. She had carried up the trays that came down untouched from the study, and the trays that came down untouched from the Duchess's room, and she had long since formed her own opinion of which of the 2 people in this marriage was the colder, and it was not the one they all called cold. "Does His Grace know?" the housekeeper asked. Something crossed the Duchess's face then, the first thing to cross it in the whole exchange, and it was gone too quickly to name. "His Grace," Aveline said, "will not be surprised." That was not an answer, and both of them heard that it was not. Mrs. Sowerby thought of the letters that went to London, of the pale, kind, sorrowing Miss Cathcart, who had lately been so much in the Duchess's parlor, and of how a wrong thing set moving in a great house nearly always came dressed as a kindness. She did not know what she suspected. She only knew that a woman who never complained did not pack a trunk in the dark over nothing, and that whatever had been said to this one, it carried the smell of having been said on purpose. "Madam," she began, and stopped, because loyalty pulled her 2 ways at once, and there was no gentle road between them. Aveline saw it. "You have a duty to this house," she said, not unkindly. "Go and do it." So Mrs. Sowerby went down. She did not send a footman, and she did not send the girl. She went herself along the cold gallery to the shut door of the study, where the Duke of Caverley had closed himself away from his own life for 9 years, and she lifted her hand and knocked. The knock came twice before he answered, and when the door opened, Mrs. Sowerby saw that the Duke of Caverley had not slept. Ivor stood in his shirt sleeves with the gray morning behind him and a week of something worn into his face, and he looked at his housekeeper with the guarded patience of a man braced for one more account of a leaking roof. "Your Grace," she said, "the Duchess has packed her trunk. She means to leave the house this morning." For a moment he did not move at all. Mrs. Sowerby had delivered a great deal of news across 30 years, and had learned to read the first unguarded second before a face remembers itself, and what she saw in that second was not relief and was not indifference. It was nearer to a man who has missed a stair in the dark. Then the shutter came down, as it always came down, and he said only, "Where is she?" and was already reaching for his coat. He took the stairs faster than his housekeeper had ever seen him take them. Aveline heard him in the passage. She knew his step, as she knew every sound in this house, and she rose from beside the trunk and turned to face the door, because she would not receive the ending of her marriage sitting down. When he came in, he stopped a pace inside the room, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, he looked at her. Not past her, not through her, to the matter at hand. At her. "You are leaving," he said. "I am." She was surprised by how steady it came. "You need not have troubled to come up. A letter would have done. We have managed 9 years on letters, and good evenings, Your Grace. I did not think we required a scene at the end of it." Something moved behind his eyes. "At the end of what?" "Of this." She lifted her chin toward the room, the house, the whole long arrangement. "You have written to London. You mean to be free of me and to take a wife who can give you what I cannot. I have no quarrel with it. It is your right. And I have always known this was a thing lent to me and not given." Her voice did not shake, though her hands at her sides had closed. "I ask only one thing, and I will ask it plainly, since I find I am done being silent. Do not send Gideon away. Whatever you have decided for me, let the boy keep the only home he has known. Send me where you like. Leave him his nursery, and his window, and Mrs. Sowerby, and I will go this hour and never trouble you again." It was the longest speech she had made to him in 9 years, and she watched it land on him like a blow he had not seen lifted. "Written to London," Ivor said slowly, "to be free of you." He turned the words over, as though they were coins in a language he could not read. "Aveline, I have written no such letter." The sound of her own name in his mouth stopped her breath. He had not used it, she thought, since the day they were wed. "I do not understand," she said. "Nor do I." He took a step toward her, then checked himself, as though he had forgotten the rule that kept him always at a distance and been startled to find it still standing. "Who told you this?" She did not answer, but her eyes went, for the briefest instant, toward the passage that led to the east parlor and the needlework, and he was not a stupid man, and he saw where they went. Then he looked at the trunk, and she watched him truly see it. Small and strapped and old, the whole of what a duchess had chosen to carry out of a dukedom. She watched him take in that it held none of the silks, none of the jewels, nothing his money had ever laid upon her. She watched him understand that after 9 years in his house, she had packed only the plain gray things of the girl she had been before she came to it, because she had never for one day believed anything here belonged to her, and she saw, with a strange, far-off astonishment, that the Duke of Caverley, who had never in her memory shown her a single thing he felt, had gone white to the lips. "You packed nothing that was yours," he said, very low. "I packed everything that was mine," she answered. "That it comes to so little is not a thing either of us can mend this morning." He was quiet a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had roughened, as though some old door in it had been forced. Do not go today. I am not asking you to stay. I am asking you not to go today. There is a thing wrong in this house, and I am beginning to think it has been wrong for a long while, and I would be a great fool to let you walk out of that door before I know the shape of it." He drew a breath that seemed to cost him. "Give me until the week is out. If you still wish to leave then, I will hand you into the carriage myself and see you never want for anything again. But not this morning. Not like this." Aveline looked at this stranger she had been married to for 9 years and found that she did not know his face at all. For a long time, Aveline did not answer him. She had learned that a quick yes was how a person was caught, and a quick no was how a person was made to regret it. And so she had made a habit of the pause, which cost nothing and told nothing. She used it now to look at the man in the doorway and try to fit him against the husband she thought she had known, and the two would not sit flush. She could refuse. She could carry the trunk down herself if she had to, and walk the length of the drive, and there would be a bitter cleanness in it. But there was the boy, and there was the plain fact that a week changed nothing she could not change back again. And there was, beneath all of it, a small, treacherous thing she did not care to name, which was that no one had asked her to stay in 9 years, and now someone had. "I will give you until the week is out," she said at last. "But I will give it on terms, Your Grace, and I will have your word on them before I unstrap that trunk." Something eased and sharpened in him at once, as though he had braced for her to weep or to yield, and was relieved to be met with neither. "Name them. Gideon is not to be touched, not sent away, not spoken of as a burden, not the winter after this one, nor any winter that follows it. Whatever becomes of me, the boy stays, and he stays as your brother's son, and not as a thing to be arranged around a stranger's comfort. That first, and above all the rest." "Done," he said, with no breath at all between her asking and his answer, and she had braced so hard against argument that his ready yes came near to undoing her more than a refusal would have. Second, her voice was steadier now that she had found the use of it. "You will not set Mrs. Sowerby or the girl to watching me, nor trail about the house after me yourself. If I say I will stay the week, then I will stay at whole. I am not a parcel to be guarded, lest it go missing in the night. You have not in 9 years given me the smallest cause to doubt your word," Ivor said. "I will not begin insulting it this morning." That answer, too, went in beneath her guard. She had one thing left to ask, and it was the thing she had never once let herself ask in the whole of the marriage. And she found that if she was leaving anyway, there was no longer any reason on earth to be a coward about it. "Then answer me one question, and answer it true, and I will call the bargain struck." She lifted her chin. 9 years, Your Grace. Why did you never once cross the room? Was it that I was not what you wanted? Or was it something else? For I have told myself the first every night for 9 years, and this morning, for the first time, I find I no longer believe I know. The question landed, and she watched it cost him. For a moment she thought he would step back behind the shutter as he always did. Then he looked away from her, toward the window and the gray park beyond it, and said a thing she had never thought to hear. "You were given no choice in me," he said. "You were handed to this house to settle a debt that was never yours, in a season you had no say in, and I decided, God help me, that the one decency left in a rotten business was that I would not also press myself upon a woman who had never been asked whether she wanted a husband at all." He turned back to her, and his face was bare in a way she had never seen it. "I called it courtesy. I see this morning that it may only have been the longer unkindness of the two." Aveline stood very still. For 9 years she had built her whole sense of herself upon one belief, that she was a thing this man had been made to take and did not want. She felt it shift under her now, like a floor she had long thought was stone, and found, of a sudden, was only ice. Somewhere below them a door opened, and a child's voice came along the passage, high and unafraid, calling for her by the only name that had ever been wholly hers, Mama, and they both turned toward the sound. Neither of them moved, and the week, whatever it was going to become, had begun. She did not show him the boy first, though the boy was what he had turned toward. She showed him the books. She did it that same afternoon, because she was not a woman who let a decided thing sit, and because she had spent 9 years being spoken of as an ornament in a house she privately governed. And if this was to be her last week of governing it, she found she wanted, just the once, to be seen doing the thing she did. She led him not to the steward's office with its tidy public ledgers, but to the small, cold room off the still room where she kept her own. "These are the household books," she said, laying them open. "And these the rents, and these the accounts of the home farm and the 3 tenant farms. And these," she added, setting down a thicker volume, "are what the steward believes he keeps, which I copy out fair for him each quarter, so that no one need ever know how much of it I set, right before it is fit to be seen." Ivor opened one, and then another. She watched him read. She watched him find, in her small, even hand, 9 years of a life he had never troubled to look at. The winter the barley failed, when she had moved money from the plate account to keep 2 families off the parish, and paid it quietly back across 3 seasons so that it never once showed. The leaking mill she had quietly rebuilt by writing to the miller herself beneath the steward's name. The orchard wall raised a course higher out of the egg money after the deer broke through one spring. The merchant argued down by half in a letter he still believed had come from a man. The pension she had gone on, paying to an old groundsman's widow out of the housekeeping, because no one had told her to stop, and she had not supposed a duke would miss it. He turned the pages slowly, and the quiet in the little room was not the old cold quiet of the dinner table. It was the quiet of a man learning that the ground he had stood upon for 9 years had been held up the whole while by hands he had never once looked down to see. "You did all of this," he said. It was not quite a question. "Someone had to," Aveline answered. "It was the only room in the house that ever asked anything of me. I did not mind the asking." He was silent a moment. Then low he said, "I have been a fool in my own house for 9 years, and I had not even the wit to know I was a fed and comfortable one." And that plain admission, so unlike the guarded man she had married, went into her chest and lodged there, warm and unwelcome, for a heart that has been cold a long while feels the first heat of a thaw as a kind of pain. He closed the book with great care, as though it had turned out to hold something breakable. For a moment he seemed on the edge of saying more, an apology perhaps, and then he only looked at her, and she found she had to turn her eyes to the ledgers, because meeting that look felt like standing too near an open flame after a long winter. It was Ivor, turning back through the rent book, who set his finger first upon the wrong thing. "What is this?" he said. "These sums, quarter upon quarter, to a Mr. Rundle of York. I know no Rundle, and the figures do not sit with any repair I ever ordered in my life." Aveline came to look, though she did not need to. She had marked the Rundle payments herself, more than a year since, and had done a thing she was not proud of, which was to leave them where they lay, because each one bore the counter-signature of her husband's cousin, Piers Halloway, and Piers had a particular gift for making a woman who questioned him feel she had climbed above her station in the asking. She had told herself it was not her money and not her place. She saw now, with the cold, clear eye of a person who has finally stopped being afraid, precisely how convenient her long silence had been made to be. The payments had begun small, a few pounds a quarter, and had grown the way such things grow when no one is watching, or when the one person who might have watched has been carefully taught to look the other way. She turned back 3 years of pages and let him see the climb of the figures for himself. "I do not know Arundel either," she said slowly, "but I know whose name is written beside every last payment to him. And I think, Your Grace, that is the thread you felt tugging when you said something in this house had gone wrong." Ivor looked at the name beside the figures a long moment, and something in his face went cold. "Piers," he said, as though the word tasted of something spoiled. "My own cousin, signing my money over to a man that neither of us has met." He shut the book. "Then we had best learn who this Mr. Rundle of York is, you and I, before the week is out." The week did not feel to Aveline like a reprieve. It felt like standing in an open field in the held breath before weather, and she had lived far too long to trust a held breath. She had learned young that kindness in a great house was seldom free, that it was most often a coin pressed into the hand, so that later someone might tell you what you owed upon it. And though the Duke had asked her for nothing, some careful animal part of her went on waiting for the reckoning to be laid before her. She let herself be warmed by none of it. She kept her trunk strapped and standing by the window where she could see it. Twice a day she looked at it and reminded herself that a strapped trunk was a promise she had made to no one but herself, and that she had kept far harder promises for far poorer reasons. Let us pause here a moment. If Aveline and Ivor's story has taken hold of you, and you would like to be here for the way it ends, take a breath and subscribe before we go on, for the quiet part of this house is very nearly over. Elsewhere, under the same roof, someone had marked the change and did not care for it in the least. Miss Cathcart, coming down to breakfast, found the Duke and Duchess seated at one table for the first time in the whole of her long residence at Caverley, the account books lying open between them and their two heads bent near together over a column of figures. She stood a moment in the doorway, unseen, and her mild needlewoman's face did not so much as flicker. Then she made her curtsy and her good mornings, and ate very little, and went up afterward to her room, and drew out a clean sheet of paper, and began a careful letter to a gentleman in York. The letter from Piers Halloway came on the 4th morning of the week, and it was, Aveline thought, a small masterpiece of its kind. It was addressed to Ivor, but every line of it was about her. Piers had heard, with the deepest concern, that the Duchess was unwell, that she had spoken of leaving Caverley, that the household was in some disorder. He wrote as a devoted cousin who wished only to spare the family the least distress. He would come himself, he said, to lift the burden of the estate from Ivor's shoulders in this trying season, to see the Duchess safely settled wherever she chose to go, to manage whatever wanted managing. He signed himself Ivor's most affectionate kinsman and servant, and the whole of it was so warm and obliging that it made the back of Aveline's neck go cold. "He knows," she said, laying the letter down between them at the breakfast table. "Read how much he knows. He has heard I am leaving. He has heard the household is in disorder. Your Grace, we told no one. I strapped a trunk in the dark, and one housemaid found it. How does a man 40 miles distant come to know the shape of a thing that happened inside these walls before the sun was up?" Ivor's jaw had set. Someone wrote to him. Someone wrote to him, Aveline agreed. The very same someone, I begin to think, who first came to tell me that you meant to cast me off. She found Miss Cathcart in the east parlor with her needlework, as she found her every morning, and for the first time in 3 years, Aveline looked at the pale, patient, sorrowing face, and did not see a friend. She saw a placed thing, set in the house the way a snare is set in a hedge, low and quiet and waiting. "You told me His Grace had written to London," Aveline said, and she did not sit. "You told me there was to be an ending of the marriage, and a new wife, and the boy sent north. His Grace has written no such letter, Miss Cathcart. There is no new wife. There is no school. You brought me a thing made entirely of air, and you watched me strap my trunk over it, and you were sorry for me the whole while. I have come to ask you why." For one bare instant, the companion's needle went still, and something looked out of her mild eyes that was not gentle in the least. Then the softness came down again, like a blind drawn against the light. "Your Grace has been overwrought," she murmured. "I only repeated what I feared to be true. If I was mistaken in it, I am heartily sorry." "You were not mistaken," Aveline said quietly. "You were instructed. There is a great difference between the two, and we both know precisely what it is." She did not raise her voice. She found that she did not need to. She had spent 9 years keeping every feeling folded small, and she discovered now that when at last she let one loose, it did not come out of her as a scream, but as something colder and far more frightening to a guilty person. A plain, flat certainty that could not be bargained with. Miss Cathcart's hands, she noticed, had begun to shake above the linen. Ivor had followed her down. He stood in the parlor doorway now, and when he spoke, the room seemed to draw in around his voice. "You will pack your own trunk this morning, Miss Cathcart," he said. "You will be gone from this house by noon, and you will pray for the whole of what I hope is a long life, that I never come to learn you did my cousin's errand for a fee." The companion went white and gathered her needlework with trembling hands and fled. Ivor stood looking at the door she had gone through, and Aveline saw the anger working in him, banked and dangerous. The anger of a man discovering that his own house had been turned against him while he sat behind a shut door and called it peace. 3 years, he said. 3 years she sat at your elbow and stitched and smiled and carried every word of you back to him. He turned to Aveline. "I put her in this house. My steward recommended her, and my steward was Piers's man. And I never once looked closely enough to wonder why a poor gentlewoman should be so very eager to befriend a duchess that no one else in England troubled to see." When she was gone, husband and wife stood a moment together in the empty room. "It is one hand," Aveline said at last, giving voice to the cold thing that had been assembling itself in her all morning. "The lie that would drive me out, and the money that has been bleeding away to York. The same hand moves them both. Someone wanted me gone from the one house in England where I might read the figures and see him plain." She looked up. "And that someone is coming here, Your Grace, of his own free will, to finish it." That night neither of them slept. Aveline heard the small cry from the nursery a little after midnight, the particular thin sound Gideon made when a dream had hold of him, and she was up and across the passage before she was fully awake, because 9 years of listening for that sound had worn a path in her that needed no thought at all. She sat on the edge of the boy's bed and smoothed the damp hair from his forehead, and murmured the old nonsense until his breathing lengthened and he slid back down into sleep with his fist closed tight around 2 of her fingers. When she looked up, Ivor was standing in the doorway. He had never come here. In 9 years, she had never once seen him cross the threshold of the nursery, and she understood, watching his face now in the light of her single candle, that it had not been indifference that kept him out of it. It had been something a great deal nearer to grief. "I used to listen from the passage," he said quietly, so as not to wake the child. When he was small and had the croup, I would stand out here in the dark and listen to you singing to him, and I could not make myself come in. I told myself a man had no business in a nursery. The truth is that I had no business in it. He is my brother's son, and your sister's son, and I am the man who let the both of them be thrown away, and I did not believe I had earned the right to stand where you were standing. He came in then, and sat in the low chair by the cold grate, and in the hush he told her the whole of it, the thing that had lain between them for 9 years like a stone that neither would name. How his younger brother Everard had loved a woman the family judged far beneath him, a clergyman's daughter with no fortune and a great deal of pride, named Sorcia. How Everard had married her in secret and got a son of her, and how, before he could find the courage to bring her home and face the old Duke's wrath, a fever had taken him in the space of a fortnight and left the secret half-made and wholly unprotected. How the family, to save its own name, had refused to own the marriage, had let Sorcia be called by an uglier word than wife, and had turned its back while she died of the childbed and the shame together before the year was out. They needed the boy to vanish into something respectable, Ivor said, and they needed the wronged family bought quiet. So they went to the dead girl's sister, who had nursed Sorcia to the very end and had nowhere left in the world to go, and they made their bargain with her. She would come here as my wife. The child would be folded in as my ward, my late brother's orphan, and no one need ever say the other word aloud. The scandal would be sealed away under a dukedom, and the debt of honor, as they were pleased to call it, would be discharged in full. He looked down at his own open hands. I was newly the Duke. I could have refused the whole of it. I told myself instead that I was rescuing you and the child from ruin, and perhaps in some fashion I was. But I have known for 9 years that I also let my family purchase a living woman to tidy away its sin, and that I stood by and set my name to the purchase, and that the woman I married had been given no more say in the matter than a table is given. Aveline sat very still in the candlelight. I thought, she said slowly, that you could not bear the sight of me, that every time you looked at me, you saw the whole of the disgrace, Sorcia and Everard, and the scandal, and that I was only the reminder you had been saddled with for your trouble. So I made myself useful, because useful things are not sent away. I stopped waiting to be wanted somewhere in the 2nd year, because the waiting was the only part that truly hurt, and I had a great deal else to be getting on with. She looked down at the sleeping boy. I loved him at first because he was hers, and then I loved him because he was himself. He is the single thing in this house that was never any part of a bargain. For a long moment, the only sounds were the child's even breathing and the small settling of the dead fire. Then Ivor rose from the low chair and crossed the little room and knelt down on the cold floor beside her so that his eyes were level with her own, and he did the thing she had asked him, 9 years and 1 week too late, to do. He crossed the room. I did not keep away because I could not bear to look at you, he said, very low. I kept away because I could not bear that I wanted to stay, and had no right on earth to it. You were given no choice in me, Aveline. I would not also steal from you the one thing they had left you, which was the freedom not to want the man they had chained you to. So I called it honor, and I sat behind my study door, and I let 9 years go by, and I watched you become the whole beating heart of a house that never once thought to thank you, and I have loved you, I think, since somewhere in the 3rd of those years, in the coward's way, from the far side of a room I built with my own hands. Aveline could not speak. The thing she had folded away so long ago that she had forgotten its very shape was unfolding now in her chest. And it hurt, the way a limb hurts when the blood at last comes back into it. She freed her fingers gently from the sleeping child's grip, and then, because she was done being silent, and because there are doors that can only ever be opened from the inside, she reached out and laid her hand against the stubborn, unshaven side of her husband's face, and felt him go still beneath her palm, as though he had been struck or saved. "Then do not go back behind the door," she said. He turned his face into her hand. Over the sleeping child, in the last of the guttering candlelight, he pressed his mouth to the center of her palm, and for a long while neither of them said anything more, because there are some truths that words only make smaller in the telling. It was Aveline who spoke first, when the candle had burned down to nothing. "You do understand what we have just done," she murmured, and there was the ghost of something wry in it. "In 3 days your cousin arrives to finish the quiet ruin of us, and appears Holloway, who has spent 9 years perfectly certain that this marriage would never make an heir, and so would never cost him his inheritance, is about to arrive at a house where the Duke and Duchess have, at long and improbable last, stopped living in separate rooms." She met his eyes in the dark. "He was always going to fight to keep me out of this family. He will fight a great deal harder to keep me from staying in it." The days that followed were the strangest of Aveline's life, for the reason that they were happy, and she had no practice at all in being that. The change was not a loud one. It lived in the small architecture of the hours. Ivor came down to breakfast now, and stayed to the end of it. He came up to the nursery in the evenings, and let Gideon show him the fortifications the boy built out of the fire kindling, and listened to the campaigns fought back and forth across the hearthrug, with a gravity he had once spent only upon his ledgers. Once Aveline came upon the two of them asleep together in the great chair by the schoolroom fire, the man and the boy, the child's head tucked against his uncle's chest, and she stood in the doorway and pressed her hand to her mouth, and could not tell whether she meant to laugh or to weep, and in the end did a little of both, very quietly, where there was no one at all to see her do it. They walked out together in the afternoons now, the three of them, along the frozen carriage drive, and down into the beechwood where the first green was beginning to think about the hedges, and Gideon ran on ahead, flushing the rooks up out of the bare branches, while the Duke and Duchess came slowly behind. Once the boy fell and cut his hand on the ice, and it was Ivor who reached him first. Ivor who went down on one knee in the mud without a thought for his coat, and bound the small hand up in his own handkerchief, and carried the boy the whole way home upon his shoulders. And Aveline walked at their side, and understood that she was watching a thing she had privately given up on 9 years before, which was a family, assembling itself in the plain light of day, as though it had merely been waiting all this while for someone to open a door and let it in. The household felt it before a word was ever said. Mrs. Sowerby, carrying up the tea, found the study door standing open for the first time in 9 years, and the Duke and Duchess at the great table with their two heads bent close together, and she set the tray down between them and went away again, with her mouth pressed into a shape that on a less dignified woman might very nearly have been a smile. For they worked, in those days, quite as hard as they loved. Aveline spread 9 years of her own account books across the great table and taught her husband to read The Theft the way that she read it. And it was, she found, a curious and private pleasure to watch a clever man learn a language that she alone had ever spoken in that house. She showed him how the payments to Mr. Rundle of York had begun in the very quarter that Piers first took a hand in the estate's business. She showed him how they swelled each time the steward fell ill or went away, how not 1 shilling of the whole long stream of them had ever bought a single thing that existed in the living world. And then she wrote to the bank in York herself, over Ivor's own seal this time, and not in secret, and asked the plain question a duke is owed the answer to, and set herself to wait. They fell into a rhythm over those days that neither of them had ever had with another living soul. She would find the thread, and he would follow where it led with a quickness that surprised her, for he was not a stupid man, only a long, idle one, and there was a kind of joy in it she had not looked for. The joy of two clever people turned at last upon the same problem, instead of turned forever past one another. He learned her shorthand. She learned that he kept a dry, unhurried wit beneath all the years of silence, and that it came out only when he was working, and only ever for her. And she found that she had begun to look forward, in a manner she distrusted, to earning it. The answer, when it came, was better than she had dared to hope, and worse than she had let herself fear. There was no Mr. Rundle. There had never been any Mr. Rundle. The account into which 9 years of Caverly's money had quietly drained belonged, the bank confirmed in its careful lawyer's phrases, to an agent acting for one Mr. Piers Halloway, and the letters lately received at that same address, one of them written only that week, in a hand that Aveline knew at a single glance, had come from a Miss Cathcart of Caverly Court. "We have him," Ivor said, staring down at the page. "In his own name, in his own hand." Aveline said nothing for a moment. She ought to have felt only triumph, and she did feel it. But beneath the triumph, cold and patient, the old fear had stirred awake again. For if Piers was beaten, then the weak meant nothing. The danger that had kept her here, that had opened every locked door between herself and this man, would simply be gone. And she did not know what would be left, when the danger was gone, to hold him to her, but gratitude and the boy, and she had lived too many years on the wrong side of a man's duty to mistake it, a second time, for love. She had watched, once, what it was to be loved for one's usefulness, and sat quietly down again the moment the use was spent. "We do not have him yet," she said slowly. "We have his crime. But a cornered man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind there is, and Piers holds one weapon that we have put into his hand, ourselves." She looked up. "If we take him to law for the theft, his answer will be to take the whole family to the newspapers. Everard, Sorsha, the word we have spent 9 years keeping off of Gideon. He will destroy the boy's entire future to spite us, and he will call it justice while he does it. And there is not a court in England with the power to stop a ruined man from talking." The knock at the great door came, as such things always do, exactly then, hard and entitled, and quite certain of its welcome. Aveline heard Mrs. Sowerby's measured tread cross the hall to answer it, and then a voice beneath the arch of the doorway that she had spent 9 years learning to dread, warm and carrying and enormously pleased with itself, asking after his dear cousin the Duke. Piers Halloway had come to finish it himself. Piers Halloway came into the study smiling, as he came into everything, as though the room had been standing empty its whole life for the single pleasure of receiving him. He was a handsome man in the particular way of men who have made their handsomeness their entire profession, fair and easy and beautifully dressed. And he had the trick, which Aveline had watched him practice upon far stronger people than herself, of making his cruelty sound at every turn like tender concern. He kissed the air a careful inch above her hand and called her cousin, and told her how very worn she was looking, poor creature, and had turned to Ivor before she could so much as draw breath to answer him, spreading his warmth around the cold room like a man unfolding a good cloth over a plain table. He had come, he said, out of nothing but pure affection, the very moment he heard of the trouble. He understood the Duchess was to leave them. Such a sad thing, such a scandal, and yet perhaps, when all was weighed in the balance, something of a mercy. He would be glad, so glad, to see her comfortably established, somewhere quiet and out of the way, and to take the whole tiresome business of the estate off dear Ivor's hands permanently, so that his poor cousin might at last have a little peace. It was every word of it offered in the voice of a man conferring a great kindness, and it was, Aveline understood, watching him, the very last time he would trouble himself to be pleasant to any of them. Ivor let him finish. Then he laid the letter from the York Bank upon the table, face up, and watched his cousin read his own ruin set out in careful lawyer's phrases. The change in Piers was a thing to see. The warmth did not leave his face so much as curdle upon it. He set the paper down, and was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again, the pleasantness had gone thin and hard, like ice stretched over deep and moving water. "You have been busy," he said. "Or she has." He did not look at Aveline as he said it. "Let me spare us all a great deal of grief, cousin. You will not take this to law." "Will I not?" said Ivor. "You will not," Piers repeated. And now he smiled again. And the smile was a far worse thing than the frown had been, because the very moment that you do, I will stand up in an open court, and I will tell the whole delicious truth of this house. That the Duke of Caverley's grand marriage is no marriage at all, 9 years, and never once a shared bed, a sham got up to smuggle a servant's grandchild into an ancient family. That the boy asleep upstairs is your dead brother's base-born son, got upon a ruined parson's daughter. And that the Duchess, and here at last he did look at her, and his eyes were flat and pale as 2 coins, is that base-born child's own aunt, bought and installed under this roof to nurse the scandal quiet. Take me to law for your few £1,000, Ivor, and I will see to it that every drawing-room in England learns your Duchess is a fraud, your heir is base-born, and your whole great house is a lie built over a dead girl's grave. I will go down, and I give you my word, I will not go down alone." The room was very still. Aveline felt the old cold begin its familiar climb up her spine, the 9-year habit of yielding, of folding herself small and getting quietly out of the way of a stronger will. And then she felt, rising up beneath it, something newer and much steadier, which was the plain understanding of exactly what her husband's cousin had just done. He had not threatened their money. He had not threatened their name. He had reached past the both of them to the one single thing that neither of them would ever spend, and he knew it, and he was watching their 2 faces with great attention now to see the surrender arrive on them. Somewhere above them, faint through the floor, came the sound of the boy at his lessons, his voice rising and falling over some memorized verse, and Aveline saw Piers hear it too, and saw him smile, because he believed that small sound in the ceiling was the very thing that would bring her to her knees. It did not arrive. Aveline heard her own voice go into the silence, level and clear, and entirely her own. "You have thought this through a long way, Piers," she said, "but not, I think, quite far enough. You are so very accustomed to my being frightened of you that you have forgotten to be frightened of me. Sit down. There are 1 or 2 figures in this business you have not yet had the pleasure of, and I should hate for you to walk out of here believing you understood your own position." She rose as she said it, and came round the table, and stood where he could no longer talk past her to her husband, as he had talked past her for 3 years together. "You have set your name," she said, "beside every payment to a man who does not exist, in a hand a child could match to your letters. You have paid a companion out of stolen money to frighten a woman into ruining herself. You have built the whole of your comfortable life upon the certainty that no one in this house could read a ledger, and you were very nearly right in it. But you were reading the wrong person, Piers. You always were." Piers stared at her. In 3 years, he had perhaps heard her speak 30 words together, and none of them in that tone. And for one instant, the handsome mask slipped, and she saw the thing beneath it, which was a small and greedy man who had never in his life been contradicted by furniture. Ivor's hand found hers, there in full view of his cousin, and closed over it hard, and did not let it go. It was the first time in 9 years that he had touched her before another living soul, and he did it now like a man driving a stake into the ground. "You heard the Duchess," he said. "Sit, or get out of my house while you are still able to do it upright." But Piers did not sit, and he did not stay to be instructed. He gathered up his gloves instead, and something wary had come at last into his easy face. "Sleep on it," he said, backing toward the door, still smiling. The smile stretched thinner now. "Both of you. I am a reasonable man. I will call again in the morning for your answer, and you will give me the one I have asked for, because you will have spent the whole long night looking at that sleeping boy and knowing exactly what a courtroom would make of him." He bowed to them, all his warmth flooding hatefully back. "Until the morning, then, cousins." The great door closed behind him, and Aveline stood in the ringing quiet with her husband's hand still crushing her own, and understood that they had, until the sunrise, to find some way to expose a thief without also branding a child of 9 years old before the whole watching face of England, and that the thief, strolling out to his waiting carriage and whistling as he went, was entirely certain that no such way anywhere existed. They did not sleep, but this time they did not sleep side by side at the great table, with every account book in the house lying open around them, and a single question between them that had no answer in it. How do you ruin a man who has bound his own ruin to a child's? Ivor was all for paying him, for buying back the notes, for anything on earth that would keep Piers Halloway's mouth shut, and Aveline let him talk himself out of it, because she had learned long ago that men reach first for the club, and only much later, and much more reluctantly, for the key. Then, a little after 2 in the morning, with the candles burning low, she stopped turning the pages and went very still, and Ivor had come to know that stillness by now. "You have it," he said. "I have it," she answered slowly, "because he has made the very same mistake with us that every soul in this house has always made. He believes the danger in this room is you." She turned the York Bank's letter around to face him. Listen again to what he actually threatened. He threatened to tell the world that the marriage is a sham and the boy base-born. But he cannot tell that story anywhere, Ivor, except from the witness box of the very court that is trying him for his theft. And the instant he opens his mouth about Gideon in that box, he has explained to the jury, in his own voice, precisely why he needed me driven out of these account books. His scandal is not a shield at all. It is a confession of his motive. If he ruins the boy, he ruins himself with the very same stroke. Ivor was staring at her, and there is the rest of it, besides. She drew Miss Cathcart's letter toward her across the table, the one the York agent had been made to return under Ivor's seal. He did not only steal, he conspired to drive a duchess out of her own house in order to hide the stealing, and he was fool enough to leave his instructions in another person's hand. And that person is a frightened woman of no fortune and no family, who will tell a magistrate every last thing she knows the very moment she understands that it is her neck or his. We do not take him for a few £1,000s, Ivor. We take him for the fraud and the forgery and the conspiracy entire, and we let him understand very clearly that the only story which will ever be told in that courtroom is the story of what he himself did, and that if he so much as breathes the boy's name aloud, he does the hangman's work for us. Ivor was quiet a long moment, looking at her across the ruin of paper, and there was a thing in his face that she had not seen there before. Something not far from awe. "You have just," he said slowly, "caught my cousin in the very snare he carried in here to set for a child." "He brought it in himself," said Aveline. "I have only sprung it." Piers came in the morning smiling, and he did not leave it smiling at all. He came expecting a surrender, and he found instead his cousin the Duke waiting for him with a magistrate's clerk seated at the table, and every forged note laid out in a long row before him, and a quiet duchess who looked at him without one flicker of the old fear anywhere in her, and told him, in a level and unhurried voice, exactly what a courtroom would hear, and in precisely what order, and how each ugly word of the scandal he had meant to spill would fall not upon the boy at all, but squarely, and only, upon himself. She watched him understand it. She watched the handsome, easy face go gray as he saw the trap draw shut, saw his one weapon turned about in his own hand, saw that the filth he had meant to fling would spatter no one in that room but Piers Halloway. Ivor gave him his terms in half a dozen plain sentences. He would sign a full confession of the fraud, to be locked away and never used against him so long as he never troubled Caverley again, never spoke one word of the family's private grief, and never came within 40 miles of the boy for the rest of his natural life. He would quit England before the month was out, and Miss Cathcart's letters would sleep in a solicitor's iron box in London, against the single day he should chance to forget any part of the arrangement. Piers signed. There was nothing else remaining on the whole of the earth for him to do. He did not look at Aveline as he went out, and she found, watching the door close upon 9 long years of having been made small, that she felt no triumph in it at all, only a great and level quiet, like the surface of a pond after some heavy thing has finally finished sinking out of sight. It should, by every right, have been the end of it. It was not. For with Piers beaten, and the boy made safe, and the books all set to rights, the week was simply over, and Aveline stood among the scattered papers of the study and felt the terrible lightness of a woman with nothing left in the world to keep her anywhere at all. She went up the stairs to her room. The old trunk still stood beneath the window, where she had left it 8 days before, strapped and patient and waiting, and she stood and looked at it for a very long time. When Ivor found her, she was standing beside it with her cloak folded over her arm. "I do not understand," he said, and the rawness in it very nearly undid her. "Piers is beaten. The boy is safe. You are the Duchess of Caverley in truth, and every soul in this house knows it. Why is your cloak over your arm?" "Because it is the 8th day," Aveline said, and her voice was steady, though it cost her the very last of her strength to keep it so. "You asked me for 1 week, and I gave it, and the week is spent. You are grateful to me. You are fond of the boy. You have discovered, rather late in the day, that your wife is useful, and that your whole house has run these 9 years upon her, and you are a decent man, and decent men will mistake gratitude in the small, dark hours. For a very great many things it is not." She made herself look up at him. "I have spent 9 years being kept because I was useful, and wanted because I was needed. And I told myself the whole time that it was as much as I should ever be given. I find, now that I am free at last to go, that it is no longer enough for me. I will not stay because you owe me, Ivor. I have paid this family's debts long enough. If I stay, it will be because you want me, and not the mother of your ward, and not the keeper of your books, and not the clever creature who saved you from your cousin. Me. And if you cannot tell the one from the others, then I would sooner take up my trunk and my few plain gowns and go, and keep at the least the single thing that has always been my own, which is the true measure of what I am worth." And she stood there, in the gray light of the morning, with her cloak over her arm, and the whole of her life strapped into a trunk at her feet, and waited to learn whether the man who had spent 9 years unable to cross a single room could bring himself to cross it now, when it was the one thing left in all the world that mattered. For a moment Ivor did not move, and Aveline felt the old certainty rise up to meet her, cold and familiar as a draft under a door. The certainty that she had asked for far too much, and would now be let go of politely, as she had been let go of, in one fashion or another, the whole of her life. Then he crossed the room. He did not make a speech of it. He came to her, and took the cloak gently out of her arms, and laid it aside upon the bed, and took both her hands in his, the ink still on her fingers from the long night's work, and held them against his chest, so that she could feel for herself that his heart wasn't steady in the least. "I have been rehearsing this," he said, "for the better part of 6 years, and I find, now the moment has come, that I have forgotten every word I meant to use. So I will say the plain thing instead, and hope that it will serve. I do not want the keeper of my books. I can hire a keeper of books. I do not want the mother of my ward, though heaven knows I want her to go on mothering him until she is old and gray and complaining of her knees. I do not want the clever woman who beat my cousin, though I will be telling that particular story with enormous pride until the day I die. I want you, Aveline, the specific you, the one who folds every feeling small, and then, when at last she lets a single one of them loose, levels a grown man where he stands, the one who packed nothing that was hers because she had never once been let believe she was allowed anything at all. I want to spend the whole of the rest of my life proving to that one woman that she was allowed everything, and that she was, from the very first day of a bad bargain, the only part of it that I would have chosen for myself if anyone in the world had ever once thought to let me choose." "I am done," he said, "with rooms that have me upon the one side and you upon the other. I have lived in such a room for 9 years. I find that I have come to hate the very architecture of it." Aveline's composure, which had survived 9 years, and Piers Holloway, and a trunk strapped in the dark, did not survive that. The tears came at last, the ones she had not shed on the carriage ride into this marriage, nor on any single night in all the years since, and she let them come because she was done being silent, and she was done being small, and she was, it seemed, done at long last with being dry-eyed as well. "Say it plainly," she managed, "since we are being so very plain this morning." "I love you," Ivor said. "I have loved you across a room that I built for 9 years out of shame and cowardice and the entirely wrong kind of honor, and I am asking you now, not for a week, and not for the boy, and not for the estate, to stay and be loved to your face for the whole of a long life. Unstrap the trunk, Aveline, or do not, and let me carry it back up the stairs myself, and lay every plain gray gown back into the press with my own 2 hands, because I have this morning discovered that I would very much rather be doing that than be a duke." She unstrapped the trunk herself, and then she crossed the last of the little distance that yet remained between them, which was not, in the end, so very far, and kissed him, and it was nothing at all like the dry, chaste courtesy of a wedding 9 years grown cold. It was a man and a woman who had wasted a very great deal of time, and did not mean to waste 1 hour more of it. When they came down at last, it was to find Gideon sitting on the bottom stair in his nightshirt, having heard the great commotion of a trunk being carried the wrong way up the stairs, and he looked from his aunt's wet face to his uncle's hand, fast about hers, and asked, with the terrible directness of 9 years old, whether this meant that she was staying. Ivor crouched down to the boy's own level, a thing Aveline had never once in 9 years seen him do, and told him that she was staying, and that he was staying, and that they were, all three of them, and the small, loud person yet to come, a family, and that he was sorry it had taken him so unforgivably long to say the word aloud. Gideon considered this with great seriousness, and then observed that he was glad of it, and that he was also hungry, which Aveline understood to be, in the particular language of 9 years old, the very same thing said twice over. He did not keep her a secret after that morning, and that, in the end, was what set the whole county talking, though at first it made no more noise in the world than a man quietly offering his wife his arm. When the county gathered that spring for the assize ball in the shire town, the Duke of Caverley, who had not been seen in society in the better part of 9 years, walked into the bright, crowded room with his Duchess upon his arm, and the whole of it turned to look, because they had every one of them heard the story, or some version of the story, and they had come out that evening prepared to pity or to sneer, whichever the night should happen to offer. What they were given instead was a duke who did not leave his wife's side the entire evening, who presented her to every dowager and magistrate and grasping mother in the county as the woman who had set both his estate and his life to rights, and who danced with her twice, and did it badly, and did not appear to care who saw. There was one great lady, a cousin of an earl, who lifted her chin and made as though she had not seen the Duchess at all, and Aveline, who a year before would have gone quietly small and grateful to be overlooked, looked the woman full in the face and inclined her head, and wished her, in a voice pitched to carry precisely as far as it needed to, and not 1 inch beyond, joy of the evening. The great lady colored, and curtsied after all, and the county, which had spent 9 years perfectly certain that the Caverley marriage was a cold and joyless arrangement, and the Duchess a nobody of no account, revised its opinion in a single evening, the way counties do, and set about at once assuring one another that it had always known there was a great deal more to her than had ever met the eye. But it was not the county's good opinion that Aveline found she prized when she weighed the evening over afterward. It was a smaller thing, and easily missed. Halfway through the night, an old man had come up to her, a tenant farmer she had kept off the parish through one bad winter years before, by a quiet shifting of figures that no one had ever been meant to see, and he had bowed to her, awkward in his good coat, and had said only that he had always known whose hand it was, Madam, begging her pardon, whose hand it had been the whole long while, and that he was glad to see it holding the reins in the open at last, where honest folk might thank it. And Aveline, who had steadied herself that evening against dowagers and magistrates, and the memory of a scheming cousin, without one crack showing in her composure, had to turn away from a farmer in a borrowed coat, and press her handkerchief to her eyes, because in 9 years he was the first soul beyond the walls of Caverley ever to tell her, to her face, that he had seen. Of Piers Halloway they said other things, in other rooms. He had gone abroad, it was understood, quite suddenly, over some small unpleasantness to do with the family accounts, and if any soul wondered aloud why the heir presumptive to a dukedom had quit England in such a very great hurry, and had never once come back, no one wondered aloud for long, because the Duke of Caverley had acquired a way of looking at a man that discouraged idle questions. And the boy, young Gideon, the late Lord Everard's son, grew up under his uncle's open protection and his aunt's fierce and undisguised love, and no drawing-room in all of England ever dared to fit an uglier word to him, because to do so was to answer for it to a duchess who had already taken apart a cleverer man than any of them, and for a great deal less. Aveline stood at the edge of that bright ballroom, late into the evening, her husband's hand resting warm at the small of her back, and thought of the gray morning she had sat beside a strapped trunk in the dark and waited quietly to be thrown away. She had come into this life owning a few plain gowns and a silence she had long mistaken for safety. She was leaving the year owning a great deal more than that, and she had not, she found, been made to give up the silence in order to have it. She had only had to learn, at last, that she was allowed to break it. A year is not a long time. It is long enough, though, to change the whole shape of a house. The following spring, Caverly Court no longer ran like a well-kept clock in the dark before anyone woke. It ran now in the broad light of day, loudly, and every soul in the county knew exactly whose hand was upon it. The Duchess kept the accounts openly at the great table in the study, with the door standing wide, and her husband working across from her, and Gideon laboring over his sums in the corner under loud protest. The 3 failing farms had become 5 thriving ones. The tenants, who had for years come quietly round to the kitchen door to ask for the Duchess whenever they wanted a thing set right and could not say aloud why, now came to the front and asked for her by her name, and were never once surprised to be met with sense. The steward had been pensioned off. His successor answered to Aveline, and knew that he did, and was glad of it, for the estate under her open hand turned a profit it had never turned in 9 years under any secret one. Mrs. Sowerby ruled the lower floors still, grayer now and no less terrible for it. But there was a lightness in the house beneath her keys that had not been there before. The particular ease of a household that is no longer holding its breath. She had wept, quite privately, and only the once, on the morning the old trunk went up to the attic instead of down to a waiting carriage, and had denied it fiercely to the very end of her days. And Aveline, who had come upon her at it, had the good sense and the great kindness never once to mention the matter again. Ivor was a different man, or rather, he was the man he had been before. 9 years of shame had taught him to sit still and small behind a shut door, unearthed now, and dusted off, and improbably happy with it. He learned to come into rooms again. He learned to be loud in them. He learned, to the boundless delight of his nephew, to lose, with great ceremony, at the wars fought out across the schoolroom hearthrug, and, to the boundless exasperation of his wife, to be entirely irresponsible on a weekday afternoon, a habit he defended by observing that he was a duke and might do as he pleased, and which she permitted a great deal more often than she ever admitted. By the second spring, there was a cradle set in the nursery beside Gideon's old bed, and a small, loud person lying in it, who had her mother's level steadiness and her father's stubborn chin, and whom Gideon guarded with all the ferocity of a boy who has learned exactly what a family is worth by once very nearly losing the whole of one. The dukedom would not, after all, pass down to a stranger. But Aveline had never in her life done a single thing at Caverly for the sake of an heir, and she was quietly and fiercely proud of that, because it meant that everything she had, when at last it came to her, had come for no reason on earth except that she herself was wanted. The years came on kindly after that, one folding gently into the next, the way that good years do. There were harvests got safely in under fair skies, and one got in under terrible ones, with the whole household out in the fields, and the Duke himself to his knees in the mud beside his own tenants, which did a great deal more for his standing in the county than any number of ballrooms had done. And there were quiet evenings without number in the study, the door standing open, the fire burned low, the accounts squared and set aside, 2 people who had wasted 9 years learning at long last to waste no more of them. The old trunk with the worn leather straps went up into the attic in the end, empty, and there it stayed. Aveline had thought once of burning it, and had found, when it came to the point, that she did not want to. It was a useful thing to keep, she decided, in the way that a scar is a useful thing to keep. not to be looked at often, but to be come upon now and again by accident, so that a person might lay her hand flat upon it and remember precisely how far she had traveled and how very nearly she had gone the other way instead. Once, some years on, she came upon Gideon and his small sister using it for a boat upon some wild ocean of their own devising, both of them shrieking with the joy of the storm, and she stood in the attic doorway and laughed until she had to sit down upon the floorboards to do it. She had grown, the county agreed, into a formidable sort of duchess, not a woman one wished to cross, having heard what had become of the last man who tried. She was aware of the reputation, and privately amused by it, for she knew a thing the county did not, which was that the formidable Duchess of Caverly still kept, folded away at the bottom of a press, one plain gray gown gone soft and pale with washing, and took it out once in a great while, and held it a moment in her two hands, and put it away again, and told no one alive why. She had been, for 9 years, a woman who never complained, and everyone had been pleased to call her content, because content was so much easier a thing to live beside than to look closely at. She was not that woman any longer. She complained a good deal now, cheerfully and at volume, about the mud Ivor tracked in across her clean floors, and the sums Gideon would not sit still to finish, and the truly shocking price of a decent candle. And every last complaint of them was a small, bright flag, planted in the certainty that she would be heard. For she had married, at long and unlikely last, a man who had learned that the quietest person in any house is very often the one who is carrying the most of it, and that the kindest thing a body can do for such a person is not to hand her a shawl or a coin or a pretty compliment, but simply, at long last, to be still and to listen. For it is a strange arithmetic, love, and the Duchess of Caverly had worked the whole of it out at her own great table in her own good time, that a woman who asks for nothing has not, after all, stopped wanting, but only stopped believing she will be given, and that the entire course of a life may turn upon the single gray morning she decides to pack a trunk and be believed at last.